Hello, everyone. Welcome to our study abroad in Nepal with Goucher College graduate programs. I just want to let everyone know that we are recording this session, so we will be sending out the recording in a day or two after. And if you would like to use closed captioning, if you look at the bottom of your Zoom panel for the More button or the three dots, you can turn on closed captioning if you would like.
Thanks. Thanks, Jen. So shall we go ahead and get started?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. All right, great. So that was Jen DeRosa, and I'm Amy Skillman. I'm director of the MA program in cultural sustainability at Goucher College, and I want to thank you all for joining us tonight to hear about our study abroad opportunity in Nepal. I'll introduce Jen and Melanie in just a moment, but I want to begin by just giving you all an overview of our conversation tonight and what you can expect. So first, I'm going to offer a brief explanation of how and why we created this study abroad opportunity in the first place. Then, as you'll see, this is an interdisciplinary project. So each of us representing the three collaborating graduate programs will talk for a moment or two about our specific programs and how they connect to this experience in Nepal. Then after that, Jen DeRosa and Melanie Lytle will tag team an overview of the itinerary for the trip so you can see where we'll be going and what we'll be doing. Then we thought you might be interested in hearing about some of our favorite moments during our site visit to Nepal back in January. I think these are moments that we do hope to share with our students who go next year, and I think they give you a little bit of insight into what the experience is going to be like. And we each have two, so we'll see if we have time to get to both of them. And then finally, we want to save time at the end to hear from you all, to find out what your interest is in this opportunity, and maybe any questions that you might have. So let me begin first by addressing why Nepal. And from our original proposal, I'm going to read this. This ICA, and that stands for Intensive Course Abroad. This ICA builds on increasing interest in the environmental humanities using an interdisciplinary approach that bridges the historical divide between the sciences and the humanities and incorporates Western, Eastern, and Indigenous ways of relating to the natural world to better understand the place of humans within it. Designed collaboratively by three of Goucher's graduate programs, the MA in Environmental Sustainability and Management, the MA in Cultural Sustainability, and the MA in Historic Preservation, this ICA is going to give our students the opportunity to work and learn collaboratively across disciplines, to see the interconnections between heritage, culture, and nature, and to build the literacy to become advocates for all three. The course is designed specifically for graduate students in our program, but is also available to higher level undergrad students if they get their advisor's approval and they can demonstrate readiness to participate. So Goucher is known for being the first liberal arts college in the nation to require a study abroad experience for all of its students. But that until now didn't include graduate students. So when Jen DeRosa came to Goucher to direct the MA in Environmental Sustainability and Management, she set out to change that. She and I met with the Goucher Office of Global Education. It was over a year ago by now, to discuss some various options. She drew on our own experiences of educational opportunities in different countries and suggested several destinations. But when at the end, I remembered Nepal and mentioned Nepal, and eyes just lit up. So there was no undergrad ICA in Nepal, so this was one that was really worth developing for that as well as for grad students. So Nepal is uniquely suited for a collaborative ICA focusing on cultural and environmental sustainability. It is a multi-ethnic and multicultural country representing a fusion of Indo-Aryan and Tibeto-Mongolian culture. Nepal's also rich in biodiversity and is situated where two geologic plates are colliding to form the Himalayan mountains. Climate change is impacting Nepal through extreme weather, flooding, landslides, food shortages, and a rapidly changing ecosystem. As a result, significant spiritual, cultural, and heritage sites are under threat. The people and communities of Nepal are assessing and adapting in response to these changes. And two of our faculty co-leaders have been to Nepal and explored some of these resources. But all three of us actually have connections and to scholars, researchers, and artists who are working in these areas. So we set about designing a syllabus, gathering proposals from various educational travel companies to make our connections and handle logistics. And we conducted a site visit in January 2024 that demonstrated to us a really rich set of experiences for a field school. And we all came back from that trip, I think, feeling a kind of golden glow. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but it really was true from our experience there. And here we are planning our first experience for January 2025. So let's go ahead and explore the different graduate programs and their connections to this field school. So Jen, shall we start with you?
Sure. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Amy. And I'm getting nostalgic just thinking about our travels and being able to share this experience with students. So as Amy mentioned, this study abroad experience is really an integration of three different master's degree programs at Goucher College. The program that I'm the director of is the MA in Environmental Sustainability and Management. And I like to describe this program as really if if you're concerned about some of the environmental issues that are facing the earth and humanity, like the loss of biodiversity, the changing climate, putting all sorts of pressure on society and our infrastructure, um, pollution, different sources of pollution like plastic pollution, and its degradation of the landscape. If you're concerned about these broader environmental issues, the students that come into our program hone different skill sets to be able to address these big challenges and to be able to to be cliche, to make our future greener, essentially. So students that come into this particular program, they tend to focus, our coursework and our research focuses on a couple of different things. One of that is environmental sustainability, quite obviously, because that's in the name. Another is climate change. We take a deep dive into the understanding climate change and people's perceptions of climate change and what is good policy moving forward. We have a systems course in which we train all of our students to evaluate complex problems using a systems lens, meaning unlike classical science where we reduce things down to the most simple and fundamental component, when you think of things and analyze things with a systems lens, you see how all of these different things are interconnected. And that's even something that we are doing in this Nepal field study, is seeing how if we have a polluted waterway or more evaporation in our waterway, how is that influencing the agriculture? How is that influencing the settlements that exist? How is that influencing the culture and the people? And we have all of these different connections between the different contents that we'll talk about. Our students also spend quite a bit of time learning about how to manage resources in a sustainable manner. And there's a lot that we can learn from our field study in Nepal. Nepal does some quite innovative things when it comes to managing their resources, especially their forests. They have a very successful sustainable forestry initiative. And we see this as a challenge for many of other societies where we are quickly depleting our forest resources. And we also focus in our program on policy, on it's not enough to understand the problems and understand the science behind the problems. and the social dimensions of why we have these environmental problems, but how can we base good policy and regulation on what we know and are constantly adjusting knowledge? And so when we look at things like in the United States, we have like the Clean Air Act and um, the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act and things like that, and understanding how have these policies been successful in cleaning up the air and cleaning up the water. And when we look at other societies like Nepal, what are some policies that they have in place that have been very successful for them, and what can we learn from this society? So in a nutshell, we're honing these tool sets so that our students in the program can be better problem solvers, whether that's in the practitioner world, working in government, working in as nonprofits or as consultants, or in the scholarly world and doing research and really better understanding a lot of these ideas. And now I'll pass the torch to Melanie to talk about her program.
Yes, thank you, Amy and Jen, for kicking us off. I am Melanie. I'm the director of the MA in Historic Preservation program here at Goucher. And the Historic Preservation program prepares students for careers in a wide range of heritage-related paths, from architectural history and preservation planning to historic site management and nonprofit work, and so much more. But every one of our students leaves prepared to be an advocate for their communities, to be able to critically examine the relationships between people and historic places, so the roles that these places can have in advancing social justice and creating livable, thriving communities for everyone. You know, students in the Goucher program learn how we can tell the fuller American story and how we can save the places that people who live, play, work, and worship there value. And so that we can continue to play, and so that they can continue to play an important role in our lives in times of change in our society and our culture and our climate. The Nepal program is going to immerse you in this vibrant cultural tapestry of Nepal. We're going to be engaging in hands-on conservation of its traditional architecture and landscapes. We're going to be focusing particularly on earthquake recovery and the challenges for heritage management that are due to climate change and development pressures, many of the same issues that we are facing here in the US. And our exploration is going to span this diverse places. We're going to be in mountain communities and terraced agricultural landscapes, as well as low-lying forests and plains in both urban and rural settings. We're going to have conversations with Nepalese who steward these places, and these conversations are going to illuminate why these places have cultural and historical significance. Ultimately, I'm looking at Nepal as an experience that just promises to broaden our students' perspective on heritage conservation. I want you all to be endowed with the skills that are applicable to your future preservation efforts in the United States as well as worldwide. So I think one of the things that the three of us noticed when we went, we had a pretty good sense that the interdisciplinary framework of this study abroad would be well suited for our three areas of focus. But as we every day, we didn't even have to try. We discovered that everything was so well blended in Nepal. I think that you'll find the same for your experience if you get to join us. Thank you, Jen. And I think I'll pass on to Amy.
All right, thanks, Melanie. And I love these three images that we've sort of selected to represent our programs. But if you really think about them, just as you said, they're all interrelated. You know, you can't really work in one arena without thinking of the other two. So so as I said at the beginning, I'm the director of the MA in Cultural Sustainability, or affectionately known as MAX. And MAX seeks to prepare emerging cultural leaders to advance their professional lives in new directions and to collaborate innovatively, I never know how to pronounce that word, with communities in a world where cultural equity is actually threatened. We see this all the time. We know that culture is dynamic and changing, and that our traditions and our heritage are sources of resilience and tools for cultural sustainability. So the curriculum in the MAX program trains students to work effectively in recognizing and supporting the cultural gifts of communities. We talk about the cultural gifts all the time in our program. To act and our students act in the world as leaders, as writers, thinkers, educators, activists, and even entrepreneurs. The program's oriented around 4 fundamental outcomes. The first being collaborative community partnerships. So our students develop the skills and the ethical consciousness of working collaboratively in community, recognizing what are the voices that need to come to this conversation, including the dissenting voices. How do we bring them all together to move something forward? The second fundamental outcome is community-based research, so that all this research that our students do is grounded in a collaboration with the community, recognizing that that the skills that we have, if brought to bear on issues within a community and collaboratively with that community, have a much higher success rate in terms of making a difference. And then third is ethical action. So our students think a lot about the kinds of actions that they could take to address cultural sustainability in different communities, whether that's arts programming, whether that's education, whatever that is, whether it's humanitarian leadership, whether it's healthcare. And so our students, a lot of our courses really emphasize ethical responsibility and ethical actions. And then leadership. Our students all take management courses that help build their leadership skills. So how does this connect to Nepal? Nepal, as I said earlier, is a nation that's rich in those cultural gifts I mentioned earlier: languages, traditions, art forms, and religion. There are over 60 ethnic groups working to retain what is distinctive about their identities and what's important to them, what matters to them. And in the face of rapid climate change, demographic shifts, globalization, outmigration, there's so many people moving to other countries for work, and frequent natural disasters, cultural sustainability ends up being a pretty high priority for communities in Nepal. So students in this immersive field school will engage with cultural practitioners, including artists, cultural leaders, tradition bearers, and activists, to learn about their efforts to sustain the traditions that are important to their communities. We'll meet with musicians and instrument makers who are reviving the traditional Serenge songs, and I'll introduce you to one in a minute. We'll visit Buddhist and Hindu sacred sites and explore the creolization or syncretism of spirituality in Nepal. We'll meet cultural activists who are leading the charge to generate economic opportunities for women through traditional crafts such as weaving and papermaking. And we'll meet young entrepreneurs who are building on traditional agricultural practices to create new markets, such as coffee, which is kind of rising as tea declines, I guess. Over the 2 weeks, we'll engage in conversations that build your knowledge and broaden your awareness of diverse cultural sustainability strategies. And then engaging with models in Nepal will give students the opportunity, I think, to map those practices onto their own practices in their communities. So I think that is a summary of our 3 programs. So shall we share some of oh no, now we're moving on to itinerary. There we go.
Yeah, we'll give them a taste of where
Yes,
we would
where are we
go.
going?
So you can kind of take a mental vacation for just a few minutes. One thing I wanted to, before we, Melanie and I will go through the itinerary, but one thing I wanted to do is point out that our behind the scenes, I'm going to call Taylor the Wizard of Oz. She's behind the scenes and she's been sharing links to the different programs in the chat. So if you want to learn more about historic preservation or cultural sustainability or environmental sustainability, she shared all of those links on the website. So thank you so much, Taylor. I also want to point out that how this works is the study abroad course to Nepal counts as an elective towards a master's degree in any of those three programs. And when you think about it, that's a pretty sweet way of doing an elective because you're on site somewhere in the world or Nepal for 2 weeks. So it's a very intense elective. Normally you would take a semester to complete an elective. So it's a very special type of class. And we recognize that you're learning so much from what you're seeing and doing and who you're talking to. So just kind of wanted to point that out. Like, how does this study abroad fit logistically within the three programs?
Well, and if I
So
could,
yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I'm sorry, but I mean, I was thinking about the innovation of this being an interdisciplinary experience, that I think it's really says a lot about our programs and how innovative we are in trying to think of interesting and new ways to engage in these issues with our students. So
That's true. As far as I'm aware, I've never seen a study abroad like this that integrates three different programs in this way. So I think it's so exciting. So to give you kind of a taste of what it's like, where we plan to bring our students to really experience Nepal and learn about Nepal. As I mentioned, it's roughly a 2-week timeline in January of 2025. It's not that cold really in Nepal in January. So I mean it's chilly, but we're definitely not hiking any mountains or anything like that. So we generally have students fly in and arrive by Sunday, January 5th. And we do essentially a loop of travel where we kind of learn as we go through Nepal. We start in the capital, Kathmandu. And as Melanie pointed out, there's an experience there where we learn how Kathmandu and the Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust has been working to restore UNESCO heritage sites. How do the Nepali people preserve their sites in light of all of these environmental changes and climate changes and earthquakes and things like that? We also spend some time meeting with the folks January 7th from the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, or ISIMOD. This is called the Living Mountain Lab, where you learn all about the landscape and the people and what initiatives are being developed to have people adapt to changes in the environment. A lot of information about agriculture and energy, and it's quite fascinating. And then we start and we will end in Kathmandu. Since we start from Kathmandu, we leave Kathmandu, we drive south towards Chitwan, which is closer to the India border. And this is really lower elevation, so we actually get into some rainforest and some quite a bit of wildlife. We see elephants. We saw a lot of rhinoceros. We had the luck of seeing a tiger. So we do a lot of learning about how do the human settlements in these areas learn to live with wildlife, which is in their backyard essentially. And we also meet with a lot of the local community and artisans and see how all of these different elements of the landscape and their culture are part of their craft, as well as how their living structures and things like that. So I love Chitwan, so I can go on and on about it. We also visit, they have some fascinating museums in Chitwan as well. One is a wildlife museum, another is a Taru village cultural museum. We actually visit the Taru village and get to have lunch with the folks there. We visit an elephant sanctuary. On like the second or third day, we go on a jungle safari into Chitwan National Park, which is as safari-like as you can imagine. We cross a river in a really awesome canoe, and there's crocodiles in the water, but they're small, so don't worry. And we get in a Jeep, and it's an open top Jeep, and you see all sorts of wildlife. So you're bumping around looking at deer and birds, and if you're lucky, you'll see a rhinoceros or elephants or tigers. So it's an experience. It's wonderful. And then on Saturday, so as we're kind of getting towards the end of our first week, we then drive from Chitwan to Pokhara. And Pokhara is a lovely city with all sorts of shops and this very picturesque lake with all of these boats. And we will meet with members I'm not going to say it wrong. Is it the Gandharva community? Am I saying that right, Amy? Yeah,
Gandharva, yeah.
Gandharva community, and Amy's will talk a bit more about that later. So I'll advance our itinerary. So mentally, we're in Pokhara, and Melanie will tell us what we're doing next.
Yeah, so we have, that day in Pokhara, and then we head out the next day to trek up into the Himalaya, because really we couldn't take you to Nepal and not take you on a trek or give you the opportunity to get up onto the Annapurna Trail. In fact, we're going to have two options for that day. Those who would want to hike and climb upstairs for 3 hours and feel prepared to do so will be able to, and those who would prefer to take a kind of bumpy Jeep ride can have also a really great experience. We head up not to a very high elevation. It's only about 6,000 feet, so we don't worry too much about altitude. But we walk through all of these mountain villages and end up in this gorgeous old Gorkha town, where we spend the rest of our day sort of wandering around there. It's a homestay, so we're actually going to have a meal with a family. This is probably the most a rustic stay of our trip. We'll be sleeping in sleeping bags that night, and there's no heat, and sort of running water is there, but it's a little more basic. But it is well worth it, because when we wake up on the morning of the 13th for that sunrise, it is remarkable. It is really just beautiful. Hopefully, the clouds will clear for us on the day that we are there. But we'll head up trek. The next morning, we'll trek back down, or those who want to take the Jeep will be able to take the Jeep ride back down. Our time up in Gondruk it's full of, we visit a couple museums there too. Hopefully we'll get to visit with some crafts people, and we often get to try a lot more of the local food. So we'll head back down from there and rest in Pokhara, because all of that hiking and jostling about in Jeeps is pretty exhausting. But that day, we are hoping to have a cooking experience for everyone. Nepali food is an enormous part of this trip, and all of us want to be able to go home and be able to reproduce some of that ourselves. So we're looking to do that in Pokhara, and have some rest kind of at that a little over halfway point in our trip. On Tuesday, we're going to stay around the Pokhara area, and that's when we'll have the opportunity to visit a Tibetan refugee camp. Many of you may already know, so many of the Tibetan Buddhists were forced out of Tibet, and they ended up in Nepal and India, and many of them in these refugee camps that have been around for decades. So we're going to visit and learn more about that experience and that community, and what they have been doing to maintain their culture. And we're also going to go to the International Mountain Museum, which is a great combination of, again, environmental and cultural and heritage matters. We'll learn about the mountaineering culture, the environment of the different mountains in Nepal, and how it has shaped the culture and the nation there. And we'll finish up our time in Pokhara with a visit to a local coffee farm, which this is going to be one of my moments I'm going to share with you a bit later. It's an opportunity for us to spend more time thinking about sustainable agriculture and how we manage historic landscapes. And we may also be able to get to a Buddhist monastery that afternoon. After our Pokhara time, we're going to fly back to Kathmandu. Even though we came to Pokhara by bus, we're going to take a plane back just to save ourselves a bit of time. And we're going to end up back in another UNESCO World Heritage Site in the Bhaktapur Durbar Square. And from there, we're going to be able to meet with the head of the Bhaktapur Tourism Organization to understand how the local folks there are managing sustainable development within this area. And it's one of these fantastic examples of what can be done, even without outside pressures, or even because of outside pressures. And then on Friday, sort of our last day, we'll go and visit another UNESCO heritage site, which a couple of them are actually going to go see Buddha and Pashupati, and we're going to spend time with a Buddhist monk who in the temple there at Buddha, and he's going to spend some time to us explaining sort of the Buddhist Tibetan traditions. We may be able to have a meditation with him. The brief experience that we got to have when we were there in January was fantastic. We really felt honored to have been able to spend that time with him. And then we're going to go out for a really fancy dinner that night. By then you will be really familiar with Nepali food, but this is like the top-notch kind of mix of food from all over the country. It'll be a last opportunity for us to try or retry some of your favorite foods in a really fantastic environment. And also, that's in a big historic hotel. And then we'll all leave on the 18th of January. We'll fly out from the Kathmandu airport there. There's an opportunity potentially for you to stick around a little longer if you're an independent traveler, and we could certainly talk to you about that if that's something you're interested in. For instance, Jen and Amy last in January went ahead and booked a flight up to Mount Everest. They didn't go to Mount Everest, but they flew up to see Mount Everest. So
Right.
there are opportunities like that. And of course, Kathmandu is in easy reach of a lot of the major cities and places in Asia. So if you're interested in traveling, and you could use it as a drop-off point. But you can see it's a very full 2 weeks with a mix of events, all the way throughout, but a lot of diversity and frankly a lot of fun and learning.
Thank you
Yeah,
for
and if
the,
I can
oh, go ahead.
add, one of our thoughts is to have people pick a theme to sort of follow as you're going through this whole itinerary, so that you would, like, if your theme is, spirituality or something, that you might find links throughout. And so you sort of become the expert on that as you're there. And so everybody will have a chance to pick that for themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, so essentially everyone becomes the expert of their theme as they're
Yeah.
observing it and watching it and asking about it throughout their trip.
Right, right.
For the next part, we challenged each other essentially when we were getting ready for this, to pick a photo from our site visit last January, one or two photos that really like captured something that we, I don't know, just had a wonderful experience with, and that we really wanted to kind of share. And I know that the trip that we do in 2025 will be probably slightly different because we may see different things, and and every trip is you can't duplicate the exact same trip. But I guess I'll go first because that's the order of the slides.
Yep.
So me being the environmental person, I love wildlife, and I was in my element, especially as we got closer to Chitwan. There's so much wildlife, and it's not like you're seeing them from far away, except maybe the tiger. We want him to be far away, but we got really close to a lot of wildlife. In Kathmandu, the capital, you'll see monkeys everywhere. They can be a little aggressive, so it's not like you want them to be near you, but you'll see a lot of monkeys. And when we got down to Chitwan, we had the experience of being able to feed the retired elephants, and their mahouts were with them, and basically making sure that they were happy participants. But they seemed to love the food that we were giving them, and to me that was a great experience. You also see crocodiles. We saw lots of rhinoceros. If you're a bird watcher, oh my gosh, there's so many fascinating birds to see over here that you won't see in your hometown. So that was kind of one of my photo moments, and I know I cheated. I didn't pick one photo. I picked multiple
I don't think
photos.
any of us did.
And then
Also.
my other photo that I picked, a lot of us, so as Melanie described, the day that we trek up to the village of Gandrik, up in the Annapurna Range, it's a wonderful taste of what it's like to trek, but yet not like doing some dangerous, wild, crazy trekking. I mean, I tell everyone we're not going to Everest Base Camp. Please don't think that. But this was such a lovely experience for me, and I think Melanie got tired of me pointing out like glacial features because as we were going up those like 3 hours of stone stairs, I was so excited looking at the mountains and the landscape and all of the patterns of where glaciers for thousands of years have basically carved these majestic mountains. And it's so charming too, because as you're going through the hike, you go through little tiny villages and you can stop and drink masala chai tea at all these little tea houses. It was my favorite hike I've ever been on. It was so wonderful. And then, as Melanie mentioned, we spend the night there, and in the morning, when you see the sun rise over the mountains, it was lovely. It was one of those moments that I'm going to remember for the rest of my life, and I can't wait to have a class of students there So we can make new memories as well in this location. Okay, I think next is Amy, right?
I think it's Melanie's next. Oh, it is me.
Oh, it's you, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. So, so I think you're going to play that little video. So
Yeah, let me,
expand that out.
hold on. Oops, sorry. Let me put it back in this mode so I can make this bigger. There we go.
Okay.
Oh darn it. The words are in the way here. Let me slide it to the side. Okay.
That should work. Well, that should
Okay.
work because it goes to black on that side.
Okay.
So you're listening to Vishal Gayak. He's the person playing the instrument. We first met him outside Pokhara at the site of the museum that he and others are building to honor the Gardava people who are known in particular for their traditional narrative songs, which is accompanied on the sarenge, which is the instrument that he's playing. He's a master musician who also teaches the music as well as how to make the instrument. And here he's playing a sarenge that he has made. The museum will be housed in a small space inside the Gandharva community, and it will actively promote their culture. So I'm really looking forward to going back and having a whole conversation around cultural sustainability with them. But later he took us to his home along the river where he was joined by his son playing the drum and another one of his students. And so this was one of my favorite moments, was listening to friends and family join in the singing in this particular song was made popular by a famous Nepali folk singer who now lives in Baltimore, which is really funny. Now, the man standing on the left, who's kind of moving and standing and clapping, that's Narayan Shrestha. He's our guide, and he'll be our guide when we go back. And he probably asked for this song because he knew that I knew the Baltimore artist. And so they're playing this song. But what I especially love about the nature of this song is with folk songs, that they start changing verses and improvising the lyrics. And then you'll see at the very end that one of them gets up and dances to the song. And it just made me feel like we had drifted from observer to participant, or from performance to community event, where we really participating in a community event. So Jen, do you want to fast forward it a little bit to toward the end so that they can listen to the last little bit with me not talking?
Okay.
And yeah. So here's somebody who's bringing in a new verse and improvising. And clearly teasing somebody.
Oops. That's awesome. Okay.
So yeah,
Hold on,
so that
hold on,
was
hold
one
on.
of my favorite moments, was just, being part of that kind of improvisational moment with these musicians. Yeah. And then the next one. So this is another one that was especially memorable for me. The Durbar squares, Durbar means palace. And so all of the historic centers in the ancient cities like Patan and Kathmandu, Bhaktapur are the site of these important historical properties like palaces and their accompanying temples. And so as such, they're often really busy with tourists. But Narayan had said that if I really wanted to see well how the square was used by locals, that I should get up really early in the morning and walk over there. We were staying in a lovely historic inn hotel that was really just right around the corner. So I walked over there and it really had a very different feel. There was an older man who was feeding the pigeons. And then a couple of young girls were selling corn to anybody else who wanted to feed the pigeons. And I did a little research on that, and it turns out that this is sort of a contested tradition in Nepal, reflecting a belief in taking care of the creatures on the planet. And the contested part is a little bit of a concern about what the pigeons are doing to the historic sites. But I also love the dog who was sitting really high up on that temple step, just watching the pigeons like circle around and land on the head of one of the sculptures that was there in the middle of the square. And nobody shooed him away. He just was part of the landscape. There were carts full of fresh veggies that came through, and people buying, their food for the day, not in a market sense, but just kind of rolling through. And then there was a group, I don't have a picture of this, but there was a group of Hindu practitioners that were gathered under the portico, kind of like where that dog is sitting, but in a different temple. And they were chanting to the harmonium, and they were greeting friends, and they were lighting incense, and they had candles, and it was like they were just blessing the beginning of the new day. And then there were several others that were making a circuit of the various deities that are sculpted around the square and leaving blessings. You could buy marigolds or that red powder that is the tikas are made with, and leaving blessings. So in fact, the top image with all the marigolds, if you look a little bit in the back, there's a man back there who is using the red powder to make a blessing. So it just felt like an opportunity to see the real side of the community and how that space is used. And I love this guy coming out of that little narrow. I think he had just come from that group that was singing. So those are two of my moments. Thank you.
And I'll go next. And I see that time-wise, I'll keep this very brief because we do want to make sure that we have enough time for your questions after all of this. And so here I am at another Durbar Square. This is the Patan Durbar Square. Amy just showed you Bhaktapur. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Kathmandu Valley, which is our first stop on the Nepal course. We'll be staying here for a couple of nights. And it's here that we got to meet conservation experts who described the devastation of the 2015 Gorkha earthquake. There was enormous loss of life back in 2015. And of course, there was the loss of people's homes and businesses and temples and schools and many heritage sites. And it's here that we'll bring you back, and you'll be able to hear about the remarkable rebuilding process in the decade since. We will be introduced to the work of traditional building artisans, get to do some of that ourselves, and consider some of the contested solutions for how to rebuild and prepare for the next earthquake, which is inevitable, unfortunately. This middle photo shows our host there from the preservation from Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust, showing us comparing some replacement pieces versus new, and demonstrating the artistry that is still present in this area, and the work that the conservationists have done to try to make sure that these arts are not lost. This place is such an interesting case study in how to manage various stakeholders, because this is a UNESCO site. We've got international regulatory bodies involved. We've got international funders. Plus, we have the local community. We have conservation experts, both Nepalese and from elsewhere in the world, all who have been influencing this recovery. And so this is a case study in how to find solutions that serve the people who use these areas, to whom this is home. This is why we're going to plan some hands-on conservation work with the trust here, which is going to allow us to work alongside some of the skilled artisans, and also hear from the community advocates who have been managing this process. Let's see the next one, Jen. So this is a very different moment. This is when we were up at the Blue Mountain Organic Coffee Farm near the middle of our trip. We spent half a day with this hospitable Nepalese family. It happened to be a big holiday, so we arrived to flower necklaces and blessings and special gifts from them. This family has transformed its terraced agricultural landscape into a new crop to Nepal of coffee for the domestic and international market. The impact of climate change and globalization has meant that coffee can be a more sustainable crop than some of the traditional crops that have been grown there in the past. I mean, both sustainably, both environmentally and economically. And coffee production is reshaping the landscape in some really interesting ways. And we got to use the stop, and we'll do this with the students as well, to think about how heritage is created and how historic landscapes, which are ever changing, are managed. In other words, how can we manage change in these places to best serve everyone's needs? Thank you, Jen.
Yep. I love these pictures.
Yeah.
We wanted to make sure we left time for Q&A, and actually I have a slide that says Q&A, but if you missed any of the links of anything, if you want to check out any of the existing program pages and learn more about environmental sustainability, historic preservation, or cultural sustainability, we thought that QR codes would be the best for you. I will send these links out though when I send out the recording, so don't worry. And then we also have a story map with more photos and information that we've created, kind of showcasing the trip. But now is really the time when we want to hear your questions, because I know we focused more on the what will we be doing and learning, and a little bit less on the logistics. So I'm sure there's a wide range of questions. You can either type your question in the chat if you're feeling a little shy, that's totally fine. Or you can unmute yourself or turn your camera on and ask your question, whatever works for you. And I know sometimes it takes a second to write the question,
Especially if
or
you're typing now.
yeah.
I see
Hi.
Isabella.
Yeah. Hi, Isabella. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. You have a
Good.
question?
This whole thing made me so excited.
Oh, good.
I was wondering if you could just talk about the scholarship opportunity.
Yeah, and actually, there's a reason I threw that last slide in, just in case you got a question about that. So to participate in this study abroad, just to zoom into the scholarship, if anyone is not yet a graduate student at Goucher College, you'd want to first apply to one of these three programs and become a graduate student. So that's the first step. And you'd want to do that this summer, like this month, because especially if you want to go to Nepal in 2025. And the cost part of it. So let's first break that down a little bit. So current graduate students, there's three pieces to the cost. And that the biggest chunk is the one where you can get a lot of students can get a major scholarship to help cover that full cost. So everyone pays the tuition associated with taking a 3-credit elective class. So that's standard for any class. And everyone has to pay for their airfare, because we have students that are coming maybe from Baltimore to Kathmandu, and others that might be coming from California or the UK, who knows. The scholarship really applies to what we call the field trip fee. This fee is the total cost of all ground transportation, all meals, all hotel stays and home stays, the cost of actually traveling in that giant loop through Nepal. And the sticker price, which I always am afraid to tell people because it's scary, the sticker price for that field trip fee is $4,464. But here's the awesome news. So Goucher has a donor scholarship, so given from one of our great Goucher benefactors, to help offset the cost of that field trip fee, because Goucher and all of our alumni and donors want students to have this experience. So we've been told that students that apply for the scholarship can see anywhere from 50 to 100% of that field trip fee being taken care of with that scholarship. So that's a really good thing to know about. So it's easy to apply. So once you're a current graduate student, if you're interested in doing the Nepal trip in 2025, I think the deadline is in August 2nd. Yeah, so you'll have to first apply for the study abroad class, which is basically just to make sure we have enough students to do this and and making sure we have a good balance between all three programs because the students will be interacting with each other. So you apply to do the class, and then at the same time, there's a link to apply for the scholarship. And the scholarship application is pretty straightforward. You basically write an essay and address the following question, which is, to what extent does your field of study, hold on, I have windows in the way. To what extent does your field of study and associated research intersect with the critical challenges of climate change, sustainability, and environmental stewardship? How do you hope to explore these connections in Nepal, and how will the scholarship support your academic needs and goals? So it's pretty open-ended because we recognize that we're going to have a lot of students coming from a lot of different backgrounds. Does that answer your question, Isabella? Okay.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
kind
I
of have a
think that-
follow-up. I don't know if you want to follow or answer the other questions in the chat first.
Oh, I missed the chat.
There was one question in the chat that I saw. Is there another one?
Oh,
From
yeah, I didn't-
Terry about travel documents, and I responded, you'll need a passport that has at least 6 months left on it, and you'll also need a visa, which you can apply for online ahead of time, and then you just buy it when you land in Kathmandu, and it's $30, and they'll take US dollars for that.
Right. And that's
Um,
for US citizens. If your
for US
citizenship is
citizens.
different,
Yeah.
the requirements might be.
Yeah. And then we will also have, I believe Goucher has, a health insurance coverage for students. So,
Yeah, they have a liability and risk insurance as well in case something goes wrong, which is,
yeah.
you know, not what we
Um,
expect, but yeah.
The other thing to add on, beyond the scholarship opportunities is that your costs associated with this are valid for financial aid, federal financial aid. So if you are applying, completing your FAFSA, you can go ahead and ask for the funds that you'll necessary, for instance, for your airfare, for your transportation, those sorts of costs, because those are justified education costs. And they will consider that in your application for your disbursement for the next year.
And so there's another question. Can this class be included in an accelerated master's program? I assuming you're referring to like a 4+1. If and yes, the answer to that would be yes. It could be considered an elective for students that are Goucher students in a 4+1 program. If you're thinking of something else, then maybe if you just want to unmute and clarify, we can answer that question. But Isabella, do you want to go back to your second question?
Sure, thanks. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, will the amount of the scholarship be based on like the quality of the essay?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's based on a number of different things. It's based on, from my understanding is it's based on student needs, but also in terms of how does this experience, I mean, truly what it's asking, how is this experience going to facilitate your graduate experience and your graduate learning or graduate research? So, so if you're not like the best essay writer in the world, I would say that that's not a make or break situation, if that makes sense, because it's more interested in the content of the essay and less the fluffiness and finesse of the essay, if you will. Is that what you were asking?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, definitely. Is there any other questions in the chat?
I didn't see one after Terry's second one. Any other questions from anybody?
I think it's just helpful to reiterate, we would love to see you all in Nepal with us in January. So your first step, if this interests you, is to apply for the program of your choice. And once you're accepted, then to apply for the course itself. And unfortunately, there is a fairly short turnaround on this. August 1st is the deadline for applying for fall semester. You can also apply for winter semester if that's when you want to get started. But I would say go ahead and you need to get it in by August 1st so we can get you an answer so that you can then apply for the study abroad in time too and be considered for the scholarship. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming. I really hope to hear from many of you soon.